on the airplane. There were people who were not willing to do that. Those people happened to be in a position to make the final decision, and I wasn't.
Ron Ostrovsky, the 777 Director of Engineering, was also quite comfortable with the idea of testing the engines entirely in the laboratory.
To be quite honest with you, I recommended we did. I recommended we were ready to do that. Now, in hindsight, I had a lot of advice from others, and it was good advice.
You know, we all listened and we all talked about it, and we decided, well, you know, it's a big development program, and it's a big change, and so why don't we go check it out on the airplane, and then we'll validate that correlation between the ground facility and the flight test. And then if it turns out that it really is, we really do understand it from the ground facility, then we won't fly subsequent engines, you know, on flying test beds. So I think both people will be right, kind of, and we'll learn a little bit, but I think most of the knowledge we'll have known, you know, from the ground testing.
The flying testbed program of flights began in November last year. On the third flight, Cashman's worries, expressed a month before, about the possibility of an engine surge turned out to be prophetic.
It's a very large explosion that you hear. It's like a shotgun going off. Usually there's a motion in the airplane where the airplane will turn slightly into the engine that surges. I think after the second surge, the crew pulled the engine back to idle, and it surged, I think, in the process of that, and then it stabilized. They did not shut the engine down. It recovered on its own.
It's kind of like an engine backfiring, and which was a gift, which was good news. It was a good piece of data, and following analysis of the engine and looking at the test data that we gathered, we realized that the case that surrounds the fan blades needed to be a little stiffer because it was moving a little bit more than what we had in the design, and that allowed a little bit too much clearance between the tip of the fan blades and the case, which allowed the fan blades to stall just like an airfoil. So it was just stalling. It was at its stall point because it had a little bit too much space.
For Mullally and his team, everything that goes wrong during the test program is a chance to avoid or prevent a problem in service. The surge led to several weeks of intensive work by Pratt and Boeing to redesign the compressor case of the engine.
So I think it's a perfect example of include all the lessons learned, do the best design you can, but then comprehensively test it on the ground, in the test facilities, then comprehensively test on the airplane, and learn from the data, and then be able to deliver an even better quality engine.
We had not tested for that specific condition at the point we flew on the 747. It was part of our program to do later, but we had not accomplished that specific test condition with an engine that had the configuration that we were flying, and we got a surprise. We learned something. And if you don't learn, particularly if you don't learn and file it away for the future, then you're not doing your job. And we did learn something. And we've accommodated it both in the way we test and also in our configuration.
So the arguments were pretty finely tuned. The ground tests did show up the surge when the engine was tested later in exactly the conditions of the third takeoff. But the issue was complicated by the fact that the test engine had undergone a considerable battering in the ground tests. Eventually, the engine design would pass the key tests that certified it for use in the 777. In spring this year, the looming event of the first flight increased the pressure on the team to produce the redesigned engines. They were working under a management system called just-in-time, where parts were scheduled to be delivered when they were needed and not before. Rocky Thomas at Boeing began to get nervous.
Hello, Tom Davenport.
Tom Davenport, this is Rocky for our 8 o'clock phone call. I guess I'm still struggling with this, with the the lateness of some of the blades, vanes in the turbines and compressors.
The schedules are just in time, and what we're going to have to do is work on a daily basis with those parts that have the possibility of jeopardizing our schedule.
Okay.
But you're right to be concerned about it, because we are as well. And just in time is wonderful as long as it shows up just in time.
Yeah, that's right. Just in time, when it's not in time, is the shits.
What Rocky needed to know is how we were doing with the testing of the first two engines. And I had to tell him that we weren't doing as well as we had hoped and that Rocky expected. And he then has to mull that over and decide how he wants to play that message to the Boeing organization. And what I really asked for was a little time to see how we do this afternoon now that I've taken some action. And Rocky will run interference, and hopefully this afternoon when we have a phone call, wrap it all up for the day, I can give him some good news rather than bad news.
Events like this are a good test of the Boeing working together philosophy.
Even though we have a very good relationship with Pratt and with United and ANA and the rest of the people on the team, that doesn't mean that everything's always rosy and you get along and you just sit in a room and make things happen. There's certainly been I've had a lot of frustration with Pratt and some of the schedules that they haven't met, and that frustration comes out, you know, and it's...
Geez, you know, my wife and I are absolutely totally in love, and we have a superb relationship, and that doesn't stop her from yelling at me every once in a while.
While the engines have taken up a lot of attention, the rest of the plane also gets tested during the run-up to first flight. On a night in January this year, the fuselage is pressurized for the first time. When a plane is flying at cruising altitude, the air outside is at much lower pressure than the air in the cabin. To simulate this pressure difference on the ground, the engineers can't decrease the pressure around the plane, so they increase the pressure inside by inflating the plane like a balloon. The plane has to be able to withstand a pressure difference of more than 12 pounds a square inch. That's more than 2 tons of outward pressure on a 777 window and much more on a door.
We start out at 5 pounds PSI is what we go to. It's preliminary check. Then we'll come down, we'll let people out of the airplane at that point, and then we'll go up to 12.1, which is our proof test. 12.1 PSI, that's per square inch, you gotta realize. You may see some leaks around doors, things like that. They're audible, very audible if they're leaking. You'll hear them. If you have a head cold, anything like that, do not enter the airplane. Anything like that. On the way up to pressure, clear your ears like this, chew gum, whatever you need. Your ears will pop. If we start going up and your ears do not pop, let us know on the radio. We'll bring it down and let you out. We don't want your ears ringing in there. No earplug.